What's going on, horror fans? Welcome back to another episode of Slash and Cast. My name is Riley, that is Nick, and joining us today is the executive producer of In Search of Darkness, the definitive 80s horror doc, executive producer Robin Block. Robin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Riley, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be on your show.
Oh, we're honored to have you here. So, first of all, can you explain to people that haven't heard of the documentary what exactly you're doing with it and what is it about?
Okay, so I am producing a feature-length documentary called In Search of Darkness, which is the definitive, iconic 80s horror retrospective. So we are tackling one of the greatest eras in cinema history. No documentary, in my knowledge, has ever brought the group of people that we brought together. Ever, basically. So it's a hugely exciting production. We are at the time of this recording, we're 6 days out from the end of our Kickstarter. And when is this show coming out? Because I could give you a bit of an exclusive announcement, but it depends how quickly it goes out.
We could turn it around as quick as tomorrow, if you'd like.
Okay. I'm not sure if I can wait that long, but I'll give you a heads up a bit later on in the conversation.
Okay, all right. Well, since you brought up the Kickstarter, you're 6 days away. Well, how are you guys doing so far in the Kickstarter? How much help do you guys still need with just 6 days to go?
Yeah, I mean, as much help as people. I mean, help is a funny thing, right? So Kickstarter is really just, I would say a premium pre-ordering platform. And so we had our original target when we started. We reached that in about 48 hours. And that would have been enough to sort of instigate production. Where we are now is about 280% of where we were. But what really Kickstarter is about, and why I'm a huge advocate for crowdfunding, is it's an opportunity to enable creative endeavors. And the opportunity for backers is to be part of something which, there'll never be another opportunity to say you were part of this. I mean, imagine going back in time and, imagine John Carpenter had crowdfunding available to him in the 80s. And he said, hey guys, do you want to be part of the thing? It's sort of, that's the way I look at it. 90% of the documentaries that were at this year's Sundance Film Festival had some form of crowdfunding. So I absolutely think it's a brilliant way to get set up. And also one of the huge elements that's really significant is that it provides social proof. It shows that there is a market. It shows that there's an interest. In life, not everyone gets a fair shake of the stick, but what I love about crowdfunding is it's very much a meritocracy. You get what you deserve. If your idea is good enough, if you can execute on the proposition well enough, you'll find your audience.
Yeah. I just saw you passed 1,000 backers today. Very impressive. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. How many stretch goals do you still have? Quite a few that you're still waiting to announce?
No, we're on to our third and final stretch goal, which is really exciting because one of the sort of key features for this new stretch goal is to celebrate iconic women from 80s horror. And we've got an absolute stellar lineup of contributors, which is headed up by Barbara Crampton and my colleague Heather Wixon, who is the editor of Daily Dead.
Wow. Yeah, so you're good to go. Which actually brings me to my next question. I mean, you have a ton of horror icons in this, including Nick Castle, Barbara Crampton, Don Mancini, Dee Wallace, and a ton more. So who are you so far personally most excited to work with out of that bunch?
Oh, man. All right. So it's such a hard question, right? Because you're going to get me in trouble. But I do have a personal favorite, just someone whose work really impacted me, because and I just want to caveat this, right? So the horror community that we've worked with to make this happen have been absolutely amazing. They've embraced the idea. They've led us, and they've given us ideas that we hadn't conceived of at the beginning. And what I've learned about the horror community is it's counterintuitive, because you think horror is horrible, but actually it's about belonging. Actually, it's about warmth and collective. And a lot of the people that love horror were the outsiders at school. And you hit sort of 35, 40, and suddenly you're the cool one, right? So the reason I've said that is because one of the films that really I loved growing up, I remember buying the VHS and looking at the artwork, and just was very personal to me, was Larry Cohen's The Stuff.
Wow. Of all
right?
the films.
Of all the films, right? And it's not it's a comedy horror. And, with an emphasis on the comedy, but it's part of that 80s aesthetic that I really am nostalgic for. So the fact that we have Larry attached to the project, for me is quite a thing. And one of the other things about that particular story is I got to commission one of my favorite horror artists, a guy called Graham Humphreys, who, if you grew up in Europe, your view of what 80s horror was really colored by him and his artwork. He did all the video cover art for like Evil Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street, a whole ton of iconic franchises when they were distributed over here. He also did the cover art for The Stuff when that came over here. And when I went to meet him for our first sort of initial conversation, I took along my Blu-ray DVD copy, and a bit like a fanboy, I got him to sign it at the end. So that's a particular, that's one that I'm really delighted, because I just think that he's a little bit special, Larry Cohen. People always talk about, the greats. You think about John Carpenter, you think about Stuart Gordon, the impact these visionaries have had on the era. But I really dig Larry. And whenever you see, there's a brilliant making of documentary on the Blu-ray of The Stuff. And he just comes across just like a kick-ass dude, just like super with it. So that would be my answer.
Out of, the 80s is often known as the decade of franchises. You've Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was pushing through in the 80s. Out of all those franchises, like, which one do you think is your favorite, or is there one that inspired you the most?
Wow, I haven't been asked that question before. Personally, it's really hard. Things hit me at different stages of my sort of adolescence. So I think when I was very young, maybe about 10 or 11, that was the first time I was exposed to Nightmare on Elm Street. And that was a really sort of profound film. And I think I might have watched them out of order as well. I think I watched the second one first and then found the first one.
No.
And then a little bit later on into my sort of early teens, I would have say Hellraiser. I remember vividly the first time watching that with a group of friends. And in fact, Hellraiser 3 was one of the first, I think, 15 rated films I went to see at the cinema.
Wow.
So the answer to these questions, what I love about 80s horror is it's such a subjective medium. And what's amazing about it is people self-identify. You see people with tattoos and the merchandise, and this is sort of 30 plus years later. There's something special about it.
Well, yeah, 80s is one of the most profound decades in general. Do you think that because of your interest in the 80s in this documentary, that it may spawn future documentaries, including like 70s horror or maybe even 90s?
It's a really interesting question. So I've got a tremendous advisory team of really passionate people that just love horror, 80s horror especially. And so we had a conversation about this recently, and 90s horror had some incredible franchises and ideas and that sort of thing. But I don't, like, on a personal level, I don't have the same sort of vibration for it. It doesn't, I'm not taking anything away from the work. And actually 90s is really coming into its own. We're sort of going past the 80s now. We're sort of post Stranger Things and, post Ready Player One. So it's inevitable. But I just think you're so spoilt for choice in the 80s. There's just so much visual gorgeousness. There's just so much to see. It's like you can completely overwhelm yourself, which is a great thing to do, by the way. But it's a little bit different with 90s. In terms of 70s, I think the 70s has been so well covered. There's been so much work and documentaries about that era. And again, because for me personally, the 80s is the era that I first, really got exposed to cinema. It stands out for me.
So I'm just curious. Another really large, open-ended question, which is difficult to answer. But I would say out of any movies in history, really, but specifically if you want to target the 80s because of the theme here, if you could work on a single film from the 80s or out in history, whatever you decide to choose, what film would that be? It doesn't have to be your favorite film, just a film that you think that you working on, you can make a difference.
Wow. Okay. That is a tough question, right? So a film I can make a difference on. I suppose it wouldn't be one of my favorite films because those are perfect. So, if skipping genres at the moment, this again, keeping with the 80s theme, you get some films which are just, they create perfect universes. The Thing does that. It's like it's a film that's been fossilized in amber. It will always be immaculate. Predator, the original Predator, is the same. Big Trouble in Little China. In fact, you could pick pretty much anything that Carpenter did in that era, and it's kind of just, it's got a special aura around it. And you do get films like that, but one that I would want to be on, I would actually say The Shining.
Wow.
Because, and it's funny, this has come up on a conversation, I think, on Facebook, on our Facebook page. And someone, no, it might have been on the Kickstarter, actually, on the actual Kickstarter page. Someone said, look, in all your materials, you've omitted The Shining. Was that an oversight? And it wasn't. It's because The Shining, for me personally, doesn't fit into the 80s horror aesthetic. It's a Stanley Kubrick movie, and it sort of elevates itself beyond this genre in a kind of way. It just happens to be a horror film made in the 80s. And I think that would be the sort of process where you would just sit down and there would be nothing I would contribute to it, but because it's got so many layers and so many levels, just being around that atmosphere would just have been incredible.
Yeah. So speaking of the Kickstarter, what kind of perks are available, and what is your favorite perk being offered?
Wow. Okay. So we have a whole selection of rewards on offer, and they start with a digital download. They move on to DVDs, limited edition poster art, postcards, Blu-rays. We've partnered with the synthwave record label, New Retro Wave. So they're going to be compiling our official soundtrack, which will be awesome. My favorite perk, you know what? I think it would be the assistant producer perk, where there's a level of investment there, which will really impact our ability to execute on what we're trying to do. But I think there's also an opportunity for people to get their names listed on IMDb as part of something which is doing something pretty unique. And I mentioned this earlier, but what this documentary is doing, as you would expect with a documentary covering 80s horror, you'd expect a lineup of 80s horror icons. But that's not the only group of stakeholders we've looked to involve. We actually have three groups of stakeholders. So we've got a stellar lineup of 80s horror icons. We've actually got some modern horror greats. We've got people like Ryan Turek from Blumhouse. We've got Lee Whannell, who's arguably one of the best sort of actors and from modern horror franchises. We've got David Michael Latt, who is the guy behind Sharknado. And everyone sort of when I've mentioned that to people, they sort of, there's a grin. But, I could walk down the street and say to a random person, have you heard of Sharknado? And they will have done. The guy created a global pop culture phenomenon, which is a sort of hark back to the 80s B movie. But also the third group, which I actually think is the most important, and it's what we call the horror influencers. So this includes people like yourself, the podcasters, the journalists. We've got the editor of Bloody Disgusting, the editor of Fangoria, Jonathan Barker, and Heather Wixon's on our advisory team. And very importantly, the YouTubers. So we've got people like Found Flicks, Good Bad Flicks, James Rolfe from Cinemassacre, and and also some merchandisers. We've got Ben Scrivens from Fright Rags. We've got Spencer Hickman from Deathbolts Records. And that group, who I deem the horror influencers, represent a bridge between the fan base and the work.
Yeah.
And just like your show interprets the work for your audience and allows them to enjoy it and see it in different ways, this is what these guys do. And it just shows what an incredible era. That's 30 years, on from it. People are making careers out of honoring it.
You pretty much just summed up what I was going to ask next. But like, if you have any final things you want to say, like why should horror fans go and support this?
That's a really good question. And, we're not looking for casual sort of horror fans to join this. I mean, they'll probably get an opportunity to see this towards the end of next year. But, if you're someone that 80s horror means something to you and you want an opportunity to join a community of people that are making this happen and to be part of, documentary history, then this is probably the Kickstarter for you.
Yeah, and again, a reminder that the Kickstarter does end this Sunday, November 4th at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. So you're running out of time. So go support it. It definitely seems worth it in every way, shape, or form. 80s horror. If you're watching this, you're probably already fans of 80s horror. So I imagine this is a perfect documentary for you. Robin, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for creating something great.
I've got a last thing to say, because at the beginning of this conversation, I said I'd some exclusive news.
Okay,
right? So, and I want to tell you, not even my advisory team know about this, because I've just said in our group chat, I've just said, here is some amazing news that's just come in, literally 5 minutes before I joined the show.
Wow.
But we've just landed Heather Lagenkamp.
Wow.
Right, which is huge. I'm so happy. And you are the first people I've spoken to about that. Wow. So thank you.
Wow, what an honor
for having me on. Yeah, and it's amazing. So we all grew up watching her, and that role was way ahead of its time. And her performance. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for just in general for making the documentary. I mean, I couldn't be bigger fans of 80s horror, so to see it be honored the way it should is great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and thanks ever so much for taking the time to have me on, and good luck with the show, and we'll keep you updated. We'd love to come back on when we've got something to show you.
That would be great. Thank you.